Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Hurst. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Executive Education at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and I'm joining you today for a LinkedIn Live event with my colleague Paul McDonagh-Smith, Senior Lecturer at MIT Sloan, who has been leading a number of our courses and efforts and curriculum around the applications of artificial intelligence and the role of leadership in that domain. So once again, for those who are just joining, I'm Peter Hurst, MIT Sloan Executive Education Senior Associate Dean, here with Paul McDonagh-Smith, Senior Lecturer at MIT Sloan. And we have a feed of your comments coming in from the LinkedIn Live. I see you're saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, which connotes to me that you are located all around the world. So thank you for joining us from whatever time zone that you are in. Please do in the LinkedIn feed, feel free to say hello, as many of you are doing, share where you're from, and if you have any questions or thoughts or comments as this conversation progresses, or any questions you'd like to put to Paul, please do put them online there, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. So first of all, Paul, once again, welcome. Thank you for joining me for this event. Perhaps we could start, in fact, rather than me giving an introduction of you, you could perhaps, if you would be so kind, tell us a little bit about your background, what you've been doing the last now quite several years at the Sloan School, and what you're bringing to us today.
Well, thank you, Peter. And just before we go any further, of course, just like to wish everybody a happy new year, and kind of wish everybody, their friends, their families, kind of all the very best for 2024. Hope it brings you kind of health, happiness, and everything that you're looking for. And we're very excited to have so many of you kind of join us for today's conversation. So that's quite kind of the leading type of question, Peter. Kind of what have I been doing here for the last 11 or 12 years? So I'll start just with kind of a couple of comments around the roles that I hold, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit about the areas of focus and perhaps how they converge into today's kind of topic, actually. So as I mentioned, I think 12 years now, Peter, that we've been working together, had the privilege, the honor to be associated with MIT Sloan. And during that period, I've acted as the digital capability leader within your team, of course, where we've had the opportunity to build a digital business, to experiment with a number, not just of transformative technologies, but also business models, to activate them in lots of ways, and really to evolve our digital strategy. And of course, with everything that's happened over the last 3, 4, 5 years, the focus of that digital strategy has become very important, kind of not just within Sloan, but across the institute. And just like everybody else on today's kind of session, we're kind of changing the motor, or kind of changing the oil on the motor while the aeroplane is in midair, and kind of going through our own kind of transformation. And then from a teaching perspective, as a senior lecturer here, I think fundamentally I've been exploring from a research perspective, from a teaching perspective, and very much application with kind of a broad range of organizations, this intersect point between technology and business. And given kind of some of my previous experiences in industry around creating extended reality, virtual reality types of systems, that's one area that I've been, of course, focusing upon. I've had the good fortune as well to have the opportunity to focus on a series of cloud type of technologies and business models, and the implications that has for all of our strategies as well. And then most recently, having had the opportunity over the last 6 or 7 years, I suppose, to kind of get deeper into AI and kind of really explore that continuum from AI into machine learning to deep learning, reinforcement learning, to generative AI, where we are today, and perhaps one might argue on a pathway to artificial general intelligence. And the reason I think that kind of background is perhaps important, or useful at least, is that fundamentally, when we're thinking about AI in 2024, of course, we're not thinking of it as a single kind of vertical set of technology elements, but we're thinking about the combinatorial ways in which it combines with other technologies. I mentioned cloud, I mentioned kind of virtual reality, I could mention series of data types of elements as well. But not only those technologies, also the human elements that kind of glue the solutions, whether it's products, whether it's services, whether it's experiences that we're building. And so I think really, Peter, the opportunity I've had over the last dozen years or so has really helped me kind of have this breadth of perspective around where we're moving with AI, but also what's required to actually accelerate our kind of transition to applying it effectively in our organizations, in society, throughout our networks, etc. So hopefully, Peter, that gives, not that you don't know the background of kind of what I've been doing, but hopefully that gives a little bit of sense to everybody what I have been focusing upon over the last period.
Great, thank you. Yes, that is helpful. So you've been in industry yourself, really driving innovation in sort of digital collaboration and business applications of digital technology. You've translated that into working with us for many years in those applications in education and learning. And as you described over the past really several years, not just the last several months when it's become so popular and trendy, you've been really not only thinking about, but kind of partnering with a variety of faculty and researchers around MIT to bring content and applications of AI in the business context into the programming that we've offered in MIT Sloan Executive Education. So with all that background, sort of maybe the one question that keeps coming to my mind is when I hear the term AI, and you just sort of alluded to this, it seems like such a broad set of sort of technologies and methods and ideas. So can you help us think about, as we sit here in January 2024, and yes, Happy New Year to you as well, what does the term AI mean to you? What should it mean to us as we're thinking about the implications of all of this for our own organizations and our own businesses?
Indeed, I'll be happy to try and answer that and put forward some ideas for everybody. But before doing so, can I just kind of pick up on something you said in your last comments there, or two points, in fact. Firstly, the point around translating. I think it's beholden on all of us. You mentioned kind of that I'd spent, time in industry. It was actually almost a career, kind of, 17, 18 kind of years. And during that period, I oscillated between technical roles and non-technical roles. And I suppose I had lots of very real experiences where, with all the best intentions in the world, technical teams and non-technical teams were kind of sitting on either side of a river. They were kind of standing there on the banks of the river, looking across at each other and starting to build a bridge to meet in the middle, and often kind of missing each other. Yeah. And so I think acting as translators in our organizations, where if we're the technical kind of people, making sure that kind of the functions and the feature sets of the things that we're building are actually truly kind of comprehensible to kind of those who are selling them or marketing them or positioning them, etc. And vice versa, those that are selling, marketing, and positioning are actually kind of empowered and enabled to translate the requirements that they're hearing from their existing and emerging kind of customers and clients. So I think the translation bit is super important. And then the other thing I wanted to pick up on was, you mentioned that kind of I work with a broad range of faculty and kind of groups across MIT and kind of outside of MIT. And again, I think that is absolutely critical, because if we're going to act as those digital translators, it kind of suggests that there's a component of digital language. And how do we learn language, whether it's computer languages, programming languages, whether it's particularly kind of human languages? It's not actually by speaking them, it's by listening to them being spoken and interacting. And so actually building that capability to, almost like those old-fashioned radios, to be able to twist the knob and change the frequency of kind of where we're plugging into and where we're kind of where we're interacting is very, very important. So one of those New Year's resolutions types of things should be for all of us to put ourselves into some new contexts and be speaking to new people in new ways, in new places and everything else, so that we can actually build those capabilities. So with that said, Peter, I'll kind of answer your question. Thankfully, I think I can remember it. Around kind of sitting here in January 2024, when we think about AI, I think I would focus probably on 5 kind of key points of where we are And I say this from a very practical kind of perspective. I think firstly, we can legitimately kind of reasonably expect large language models to be a dominant force throughout this year. One of the ways in which I kind of think about this is we're very accustomed to thinking of graphical user interfaces. Perhaps we should also think of large language models, LLMs, as a language user interface, because what we're seeing, of course, with the toolkits and developer kits that kind of Google, OpenAI, and lots of others are putting together, is a very multimodal type of approach. So language isn't kind of as an input, isn't necessarily kind of language as an output. Yeah, we're talking about images, we're talking about video, we're talking about protein fold, we're talking about lots of different capabilities with the multimodal. I think we can expect as well, whilst kind of LLMs and generative AI are going to be very dominant in 2024, there's going to be a slightly different flavor of it, in the sense that we're going to hear a lot about the policy, regulatory, legal kind of aspects of all of this as well. So we'd be well served to kind of keep an eye on all of that. I think we're going to see, it's kind of interesting, I just mentioned Google, OpenAI, for example. I think they're going big on going small, if you see what I mean, almost as a platform type of play. So any of us kind of without being programmers or having coding skills, I think can become generative AI app developers. So I think it's a case of rolling up our sleeves and kind of checking out these kind of developer kind of kits that they're all putting out there, and playing around with this, touching it, getting a feel for it, and kind of seeing what we can do. And then, as I mentioned, this multimodal kind of aspect, I think if I had to pick one kind of mode, I think that the language to video is going to be very interesting. I remember, I think last May or June, watching a film, in fact, called Frost. I don't know if people out there have kind of watched this. And it was a series of kind of still images that have been combined to create a film, a short 12-minute film, I think it is. And it was pretty stilted, it was kind of staggered. It was kind of, there was a lot of lag, and there was a lot of this, that, and the other. What I'm seeing now in that space is some really high quality kind of video and film being created. So if we think about the possibilities, you can imagine kind of take a professor or a lecturer at a university, kind of taking all of their notes, perhaps, for kind of classes or lectures or kind of sessions that they teach, and actually trying to kind of fine-tune the model, large language model, or the multimodal model, to actually create video as an output. A very interesting type of thing to consider. And I think particularly, just drawing a kind of threading a needle here, of course, 2024, we have a series of important elections coming up, whether it's in the US or in the UK as well. So I think, unfortunately, we should brace ourselves for generative AI kind of developed or created disinformation becoming very important. And on the back of that, a very real kind of push in the first half of this year for regulatory and government and policy to try to manage some of that. I think in the US, of course, the election will be later in the year, most likely in the UK as well. So I would expect kind of we'll see a lot of movement on the regulatory and government and policy side. Just to mention a few of the points that I think we should be considering as we move into 2024.
Great. A lot of that, if I was hearing you correctly, it sounded like sort of in the arena of generative AI, and as that is evolving, what about the other aspects of AI? Have they faded, or are they going to continue to be important as well?
Oh, of course, Peter, and thank you for bringing this up. Generative AI is by no means the only show in town. Okay, if we think about that continuum that I mentioned when we're speaking about my role here, thinking about the transition. So fundamentally, if we allow ourselves kind of the luxury for once of kind of giving ourselves quite a broad kind of timeline to think through. So if we were to say, put a mark in the sand and say kind of, okay, post Second World War into the 1950s, kind of first kind of adventures and kind of ventures in AI, and kind of think about the 70-year kind of period. We've seen a lot, haven't we? We've seen different waves of AI. We've seen that transition from what I hear people call now the good old-fashioned AI of kind of expert systems, And one of the ways in which I think of that transition from expert systems to learning systems is kind of the comparison of juxtaposition of the Gary Kasparov kind of Deep Blue kind of saga in 96 and 97, where fundamentally a brute forced kind of approach enabled in the rematch the Deep Blue machine to beat Kasparov. And then juxtapose that with what we saw in, I think it was 2016, 2017 with AlphaGo, with the learning kind of algorithms and learning systems. We saw a very nuanced, almost intuitive, instinctive type of approach where the systems are kind of self-learning and teaching, et cetera, et cetera. And so those approaches, whether it's kind of that transition from the brute force to the learning systems, whether it's into the techniques of deep learning, which fundamentally has given us kind of generative AI, whether it's the reinforcement learning and the incentivization, these are all kind of elements that can be applied in so many different aspects. And actually, it's probably one of the ways that we might think about this is to recognize or consider recognizing AI itself as a general purpose technology. Okay, so if we think about AI in the same way that historically and kind of traditionally we've thought about the internet or the introduction of electricity, etc., then one might argue that kind of we can reasonably expect it to have an impact in so many, or pervade, or kind of be absorbed into so many aspects of our kind of society, of our organizations, of the way that we interact. And so it's not very reasonable to expect that generative AI, it's not a silver bullet when it comes to AI. There's going to be different technologies, different techniques. And one of the key things that for all of us is going to be important is to understand which flavor of AI to be applying to which problem at which time. Okay. And in fact, we'll probably come on to talk about this, that the program that we're developing at the moment around leading the AI-driven organization, this is one of the key kind of learning objectives of the program is to try to equip people to have that intuition, or develop that intuition and that kind of set of skills to determine, well, what type of AI needs to be applied to what type of problem, to be measured in what type of way, and for what reasons.
Great. So maybe you could expand on that a little bit and sort of define further for us. Again, when we talk about generative AI, that's about essentially creating content and knowledge in whatever kind of form it's in. And then there's what may be described more as kind of analytic sort of AI tools, so pattern recognition, data analysis, and those kinds of things. What are some of the key things that we should be thinking about that's in that broader spectrum of, in addition to the very interesting and trendy and sort of thought-provoking applications of generative AI?
Yes, indeed. So perhaps, and this is an analogy that kind of I find myself using quite often in these types of discussions, is almost like pointillist artists. We need to take a couple of steps back from the mosaic to be able to make out its picture, its colors, its contours. When you have your nose pressed up to kind of those kind of mosaics, it can be very difficult to make out truly what's going on. So by taking a couple of steps back, we give ourselves the opportunity to kind of recognize the bigger picture as such. And so when it comes to generative AI, the couple of steps I would take back is to say, well, okay, fundamentally, we're looking at kind of machine learning. That there are two major families of machine learning. On one hand, we have the family of pattern recognition, okay, and then on the other hand, we have this family of synthesis and creation, okay. And so in different, for example, the pattern recognition part of it, I would argue, and knowing that you're a physicist, you can perhaps kind of back me up or kind of challenge me on this. But I might be tempted to argue that mathematics was a very useful, very well-fitting regime and language for the problems of physics. But when it comes to, for example, healthcare, biotech, all of those types of areas, we're finding that machine learning and its capabilities around pattern recognition are an incredibly well-fitting regime. Because if we were to take those problems and try and resolve them solely mathematically, it's quite the challenge for a series of equations to be able to kind of manage the pattern recognition and the measurement that's required. Okay, and so I think taking a couple of steps back from what's a la mode or kind of what's fashionable right now, not to suggest for a moment that it isn't providing impact and value, because it is, and perhaps we can talk about the ways in which it's doing so kind of shortly. But this point around making sure that we're going with the right type of AI is very, very important. And so I think it's really just the tip of the iceberg, actually, when we think about disruptive technologies and transformative technologies in 2024, because and in fact, even that is quite I find quite an interesting point. We often hear people talk in those terms of disruptive technologies. I would invite everybody on our session today to kind of take the opposite perspective and think in terms of ruptive technologies. I'm not even sure if that word exists, but to think about kind of the positive, constructive ways that we can be using these technologies in our organizations. And so in some ways, I think generative AI has done a fantastic job of, and the way it's being presented, of course, by OpenAI with ChatGPT and the business model and all the user interface, et cetera, et cetera. It's acting as a bit of an arrowhead, because if you think about it, and I always get the dates wrong here, you'd be able to correct me, Peter. But if you go back to the California gold rush, when was that? 1851, 49 or 51? I always forget. But there's always that kind of joke, isn't there? The kind of the people who made the money were the ones selling the pixies and the axes. Okay, so that kind of leads me to that connection to, with all due respect, to cloud and computing infrastructure. Okay, none of this is kind of done alone or in a vacuum of sorts.
I like that point. The generative AI has really sort of captured all of our imagination in some ways, and has really kind of demonstrated in a way that we can all experience and understand what the power of these underlying technologies combined with just vast amounts of processing power and vast amounts of data that they rely on.
Yeah.
But that it's important not to let that mask all of these other approaches to AI and applications of AI, which have been really developing in tandem and are still incredibly important and powerful. So, one question that we had, I think Cheryl Dorfman in the chat was asking for any examples that come to mind from the field of healthcare. You just touched a little bit on that field, and I'm thinking, especially. Let's hold off on the generative AI discussion for a little bit longer and really focus in on some examples of, as you described it, sort of the pattern recognition and analytic modeling capabilities that these AI tools are enabling.
Yeah, and so kind of to introduce my comments in response to your question, Peter, I think if everybody wouldn't mind looking at the graphic that's kind of sitting behind me, where I've actually tried to kind of convey a spirit or a sense of a human being leading the machine, okay, with AI, and to kind of to build on the you mentioned the word imagination kind of just a few moments ago, and I think for all of the power of which is immense and kind of wondrous in so many different ways, and I'll kind of apply it to real examples in just a second, that it's important for us to remember that fundamentally we're talking about a recalibration of a human and machine partnership here. Yeah, if you think about one of the things that we often talk about with generative AI is the fact that you can kind of deconstruct or decompose your roles in your organization down into a task kind of level. So if I think about machine learning and pattern recognition in kind of the healthcare or biotech or kind of drug and pharma kind of space, I would start kind of contrary to kind of your positioning, if I may, but by kind of drawing reference to the AlphaFold work, okay, that's being done. And any of us can go to kind of Google DeepMind and we can kind of check out the kind of protein folding model that they've built and kind of made publicly available. And that's kind of incredibly important in terms of using almost game theory and kind of learning algorithms to determine the way in which kind of proteins will fold over a period of time, giving us the opportunity to create for drug discovery an accelerated rate for things like Alzheimer's and lots of other kind of diseases as well. But dialing back from that kind of generative AI example, if I think about machine learning and its capabilities about pattern with regard to pattern recognition, it's well documented, isn't it? The kind of the recalibration of the role between the consultant and the algorithms in terms of looking for kind of anomalies in X-rays, whether it's kind of for breast cancer. Think about the work that Regina Barzilay or Dina Katabi, kind of our colleagues here at MIT are kind of doing around the way in which that pattern recognition capability can actually spot anomalies, bring them to the attention of the consultant that, quite frankly, even if we had a team of hundreds of consultants, they wouldn't be able to process that much data and information in kind of such a short amount of time as the algorithms do. And then adding that and complementing that with the expertise and the professionalism of the consultant to determine kind of what type of treatment or what that really means is an incredibly powerful complementary force of the humans and the machines. So it's not humans plus machines, but humans kind of multiplied by machines, augmenting our kind of capabilities to provide treatment, to understand kind of scenarios in a way that we never really could realistically on our own, even if we tried to brute force it with a number of people.
Okay, so that, it's an interesting example, I think, of drug discovery. You're talking about the need to, in many different fields, perhaps, to deal with such large amounts of data. That human beings alone would really struggle to be able to manage that, but in partnership with these technology tools, then we can achieve something in combination.
If I may as well, Peter, sorry to interject. Just to be kind of crystal clear, this may appear a very strange kind of analogy, but if I'm thinking about machine learning as a casserole or kind of a meal to cook, it would fundamentally have three ingredients, yeah, irrespective of kind of what version of machine learning we're talking about. Firstly, we have to kind of very clearly define the problem. What are we trying to solve? Okay, so we clearly define the problem that we need to solve. Then secondly, the second kind of key ingredient is to have the required data set, okay, in order to be able to kind of explore, analyze, recognize patterns, etc. And then thirdly, to have the algorithms in place that can kind of fine tune and calibrate the and work with the data set so that we can actually make progress towards resolving that problem that we've identified at the beginning. So one of the things that we're kind of going to come back to, I'm sure, kind of during today's discussion, is that fundamentally, if we're thinking about AI here in 2024, I think irrespective of whether it's for your business, Peter, for the work that I do, anybody else on today's call, there are three kind of key questions that we need to be asking ourselves. Is my data ready? Are my people ready? Is my enterprise strategy ready? Yeah. And so in the same way as kind of cooking a meal, you have to have the right set of ingredients kind of added at the right time. It's the same in terms of our application of AI as well. If we don't focus on kind of making sure and understanding what we need in terms of our data, what we need in terms of our workforce and our people and our capabilities, then it's very difficult for me to understand, or a challenge at least, to understand how we're going to make progress against kind of our organizational kind of strategic requirements and actually develop an enterprise strategy that's going to work and move us forward. There's that whole idea as well around, everybody has been playing, well, not everybody, but kind of if you look at the research and kind of the data that's out there, something like reading kind of McKinsey reports, reading an incredibly good kind of research paper that was written by Eric Brynjolfs and Danielle Lee and another colleague kind of here at MIT kind of last year. Probably 60 to 70% of organizations are already engaged in using generative AI and AI in kind of various activities within their organizations. Approximately 40% of organizations at the board level are thinking about the types of investments that they need to make in AI. But that's all good and well, isn't it? We've been having those conversations all the way through 2023. here in 2024, we're very much kind of in a position, well, we've set pretty high expectations in some areas around what we're going to achieve. What's the reality of this? So how do we actually manage the return on investment? Yeah, okay, as always, but how do we manage the return on the expectation as well? You know, it's kind of traditionalism. We've seen it with so many other technologies over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years that it's almost like a kind of hype cycle a little bit, yeah, where there's kind of a great amount of excitement and then kind of reality bites a little bit in terms of as leaders or managers within our organizations, we almost would appreciate having a black box type of solution where we put data in at one end and the sausage machine kind of churns out kind of solutions and very kind of applicable kind of algorithms and solutions out the other end. The reality, though, for the machine learning engineers and people working in this space, that's a lot more nuanced in terms of the data sets and the fine tuning and privacy, copyright, regulatory kind of issues as well. So oftentimes we can expect that kind of somewhat of a delay, and we've got to be careful that kind of the expectations that we've set, that the enthusiasm and the optimism doesn't kind of get waylaid or doesn't get pushed to one side. And we're able to kind of have a practical, reasonable, rational kind of strategy and plan for how we're going to integrate AI in our businesses. And if I may just add one point, and then I'll kind of stop. When I talk like this, I kind of remind myself of the work of Daniel Kahneman, you know, the Nobel Prize winning economist, and his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And in some ways, I think it's a very wise approach when it comes to AI as well, having this kind of duality of approach. So replacing or kind of augment kind of thinking fast and slow to AI fast and slow. In the fast sense, to kind of be exploring, to be experimenting, proof of concept, etc., kind of doing various things, chatbots, kind of looking for back office assistant types of services, sales, marketing, you know, lots of kind of content generation, etc. However, at the same time, being wise, not just smart, but being wise in the sense of kind of taking the data and the results of all of these experiments and using them to create a medium to longer term strategy for our organization. So there's a duality, and I think if any of us find ourselves calibrated too far in one direction of kind of, okay, we're experimenting, you know, enormously, but we're not actually thinking about envisioning kind of what this means for a medium to longer term strategy. And by that, I mean the next 2 to 4 years, probably with AI, then I think we're going to get caught out a little bit, and vice versa. If we're thinking about is this medium to longer term enterprise strategies, well, we're never actually going to be able to fine tune them and calibrate them enough if we don't actually do the proof of concepts and the experiments at the beginning, or continue to do them, if that makes sense, Peter.
Yes, I'm hearing you describe a kind of a continuum from,
Yeah.
you know, are we using AI, you know, at all? Just are we, through to how are we using these tools to create value for our customers, for our employees, for our businesses, to how are we thinking more strategically about the larger scale implications that are strategic for not only our business as it is, but for essentially how our industry is going to evolve. Is all of that is happening at the same time is what you're describing?
Yes, and with all of that, you know, if I kind of borrow, and I think that this again kind of reverts back to kind of the idea of pattern recognition. We all kind of spend a lot of time, don't we, within our chosen domains of kind of expertise and work. And I think almost again, like those pointillist artists, kind of taking a couple of steps back to kind of make up the mosaic. When we're thinking about pattern recognition, we should be thinking about it from our own problem set and our own domain, but perhaps other industries as well, and thinking about lessons learned that we can kind of take from one area and apply into another one as well. So I think that there is all of that continuum. We're definitely at a point. Again, it kind of reminds me of the MIT kind of motto of mens et manus, yeah, kind of mind and hand, where we need to be reflecting and thinking about all of this, but at the same time actually taking action and making sure that the things that we're learning, we're then applying in our organizations as well. I'm struck as well, and I don't mean to be, you know me very well, Peter, so hopefully you don't think I'm overly negative or cynical or what have you. I tend to be quite optimistic, I hope, with regard to technology and the disruptive kind of capabilities of all of this. But one thing that strikes me as worth thinking about and reflecting upon is, well, do you know what? Maybe we're going through almost a Stephen Jay Gouldian type of punctuated equilibria moment. Okay, so I'm taking a pattern there from biological kind of evolution, okay, and I'm not getting into kind of Darwinist types of things. I'm just kind of taking the general idea that fundamentally I might be inclined to argue that any of our organizations or any of our industries, if we do the same things that we've been doing for the last 10 years, and even do them in a linear kind of improvement type of way, we're not going to get the same results as we did for the last 10 years. I think AI as a general purpose technology, I would like to argue for people to consider this, that AI as a general purpose technology is punctuating the equilibrium of how we've operated over the last periods. And so therefore, I think that very much means that we're in a period where we need to explore, we need to experiment in order to be able to evolve effectively. Linear extension or development or evolution from where we've been over the last 10 or 20 years isn't going to make us sustainable and profitable in our industries for the next 5, 10, 15 years. So there's going to be this constant tacking and jibing, Peter, this twisting and turning, I would argue, everybody. And in some ways, that might be kind of somewhat disorienting. And I think one of the things that we need to put into place to be able to manage ourselves, our teams, our organizations, as we go through those choppy waters, to kind of stretch the metaphor kind of painfully, is kind of develop this opportunity to reflect. You know, I often kind of think, I go back to thinking in computational kind of thinking terms. We've got a problem. You have a big problem, the biggest kind of challenge that you have in front of you. What are you going to do? You're going to break it down. You're going to decompose it into this kind of set of sub-problems. One problem becomes 4, becomes 16, becomes 64. In the field of AI, you determine kind of which technologies and which techniques are going to be helpful for kind of these sub-problems that you develop. You look for patterns kind of either from within your problem set or somebody else's that you can then apply to kind of be more efficient and kind of more effective, get to where you need to get to more quickly. But then a very important point, I think, is that you need to abstract. You need to separate the signal from the noise, okay? And with the amount of kind of distractions and data and pressures that we all and our friends on this session today have, I think it's super important that we develop and fine-tune our own capabilities to reflect. So I have access to your calendar. I promise you I don't look at it kind of overly, but I don't think I've ever seen in your calendar a kind of a 15-minute slot that says reflection, yeah, or kind of take a step back or kind of think about things. But given the reality of kind of the impact of AI and a series of other technologies and the almost molecular kind of coming together of all of these things with a series of human factors as well, I think honestly we need to kind of give ourselves some breathing space in order to kind of abstract so that we can create the algorithms which, in this case, I would argue are kind of recalibrated human and machine kind of partnerships that are going to enable us to take advantage of the strengths of machine learning, of AI, but also mitigate its risks. Okay, you think about any kind of any kind of, if you play chess or sports or any kind of game, and particularly kind of when you're playing against another person or another machine, it's not only your strategy isn't only to play to your strengths, but it's also to play to your weaknesses, to protect your weaknesses. And so as we think about the way that we're partnering with AI in our organizations, I think we should be mindful of this component as well. What are the human weaknesses that the kind of AI capabilities can mask? Because let's be honest, we're pretty buggy, yeah? And when we think about artificial general intelligence and operating at a cognitive level across kind of a series of activities, I think we give ourselves often too much credit as humans. You know, we set the bar pretty high for the machines. So I think, yes, play to the strengths of the machines, of course, and the algorithms and the AI technologies, but also, you know, make sure that we're kind of accommodating the incredible human evolutionary kind of capabilities that we have as well, and using both to also mitigate our weaknesses and the weaknesses of the machines. If that makes sense, Peter.
Yes, thank you. So I've just been looking as you were talking through some of the questions, and as you were describing sort of the applications, one of the questions people are asking a lot is, well, what about adoption?
Yeah.
Maybe there are particular companies and organizations that are almost by definition sort of AI driven and AI first. So typically technology or engineering driven kind of businesses, perhaps. And Andrea Corda makes the comment that in his experience that engineering teams have been very quick to adopt these technologies, but that it's harder to get them to propagate further out into sort of the general business organization. Is that a real observation? And or it's his observation, but is that mirrored by your experience? And if it is, what antidotes do you have for it?
Well, isn't it interesting? Okay, I think that's a very interesting reflection. Did you say Andrea was the person who? Yes. So Andrea, thank you for bringing this point up, because when we look, okay, see, kind of jumping in, the question's jumping up here. I think it's a very interesting reflection because it makes me think almost in terms of osmosis and osmotic kind of considerations. So what is it about certain, and I think I'd invite everybody to reflect upon this for the next kind of 30 seconds or so. Why might it be that engineering functions or technical functions or technology and technical organizations seem to osmotically be able to absorb the transitions and the evolution of kind of AI technologies to drive to actually kind of squeeze out more value from generative AI or machine learning capabilities than other organizations? And if we reflect upon this, and this is one of those kind of examples of kind of taking a couple of steps back from the mosaic to think about it, what is it about either the infrastructure, the culture, the workforce capabilities of kind of engineering or technology functions? I remember reading something, Peter, a couple of months ago, where the kind of the value or the impact and the value creation of generative AI was almost double in technology companies and some telecoms and computing companies than it was in retail and other companies, kind of like a 9% uplift versus kind of a 4%. And the argument was made that it was largely because these organizations had created processes and policies for other technology implementations over a period of time, that they were able to leverage the pattern recognition of kind of what it took to introduce social media, what it took to introduce kind of different CRM or kind of ERP or different, they'd almost created a DNA within their organizations that had made them quite adaptable and flexible to technology kind of changes. So I think it comes back really to where we started a tiny bit in your opening comments around the translation. So the translation of the capabilities or the potential, if I put it this way for a second. So you might have, Peter, you might have had me say this before, that if you think about generative AI or any of these AI kind of technologies in the family, and imagine, I tend to visualize things in my head, and imagine imagine a New York skyscraper where the potentiality of this technology is sitting on the 85th floor. Right here today, most organizations, without being disrespectful, are probably using 10, 12, 15. It's probably on the 15th or the 20th floor. The user experience, the products, the design, kind of the platforms they're developing with these technologies. How do you get from the 20th floor to the 85th? Okay. And one of the arguments you've heard me make, and one of the arguments I'm kind of researching, is that it's not simply a technology play, it's the creativity, it's the curiosity, it's those types of components that you can build into your organization. So how do we actually combine, in terms of workforce development, the technical know-how I suppose I'm arguing really, Peter, and somewhat polemically, that you're not going to get to the 85th floor by hiring 1,000 machine learning engineers. You're going to get to the 40th, 50th, 60th floor, which is great, it's progress, etc., by actually not just becoming a better learning organization, but by becoming a better teaching organization. So what is it that your people know on the technical side or on the non-technical side that can actually empower and enable the other side of the fence? And in fact, even that is kind of a pretty futile kind of distinction to make today. Because I would argue what we're seeing with AI, and I remember, as you well know, Peter, I've spent kind of time in technical roles, non-technical roles. I was kind of one of the heads of learning at a company called Nortel, but I was also the managing director of emerging products and technology, and I was in R&D and all of that type of business. But I think what we're seeing is, whereas organizations spent hundreds of millions, billions of dollars trying to de-silo their organizations, that AI, generative AI, and the combination of those kind of AI technologies with computing are actually going to do the job for us a little bit. Because if we're going to truly try to get the best value out of these and the impact, create value, deliver it, etc., with these technologies, then we're going to have to create very real cross-functional kind of teams. Okay, it's not going to be a case of creating groundbreaking or brilliant products and services with kind of your machine learning engineers alone. You're going to have your salespeople, your marketing people, your finance, your legal. Do you know what? You might even have a philosopher. You might have a social scientist. You're going to have a broader kind of cross-functional team, which fundamentally means, from a geometric kind of position, that there's a de-siloing, that we can't really think, in my opinion, vertically about the value of these technologies, but more horizontally. This is a rising tide that lifts all kind of ships or boats. And I'm very taken by the work of Manuel Castells, who probably, it's got to be 35 years ago now, kind of published his trilogy of books on the network age. And I remember reading at the time when I was working in telecoms and thinking, crikey, this is incredible, because at the time people spoke about the network effect being a function of the number of nodes that you have in your network, whereas he was talking about the flows between the nodes in the network. Flows of time, flows of space, but I would argue flows of intelligence, of innovation, of insight. And so the degree to which our organizations can actually take their people, take their machines, create networks with them, and improve the flow of information between the nodes is going to be a lot more powerful in terms of a network effect than actually the number of nodes in itself. Yeah, I think the flows. And so what do I suggest that kind of is required? I think it's beholden on all of our organizations to communicate very clearly, to almost have honest organizational kind of dialogue, to sponsor almost catalytic creativity within our organization, innovate via our employees, think about new metrics of value. Are we actually measuring the right things? If I speak about punctuated equilibria, the things, the measurements, the units of measurement that we use to determine value and impact, not just revenue, not just kind of lifetime value of our kind of customers and clients, but are there kind of, with these new technologies, with new general purpose technologies, with new disruptive transformative technologies, there are always opportunities, history tells us, to actually think about metrics of value and the way that we measure our interactions in new and interesting kind of ways. And one of the ways in which I think the introduction of AI, or the propagation of AI through our networks, creates that kind of new metric of value is the de-siloing. Fundamentally, we have an opportunity in front of us to create a networked organization that isn't just a learning organization, but can become self-teaching a little bit. We can have a kind of series of activities and approaches that actually increase the osmotic flow of information and intelligence, which in turn drives kind of the innovation, which in turn drives the intrinsic motivation, discretionary effort, and better results. So I'm trying to bring together two worlds, I suppose, here, for the tech and the non-tech, by actually almost a judo move of kind of saying these transformative AI technologies, yep, they have promise, but they have perils. And if we're able to combine them effectively with our human capabilities, we can actually harness them to actually kind of evolve and kind of float our organizations higher in the marketplace.
Thank you. I think there was a lot of interest as you were talking there. One question, I'm just looking back up, we pull someone at random, but a bit close to my heart. Laura L. Curry was asking a question really from a personal perspective, but I think it sheds a light on something important organizationally that you said there. Her question was, as someone who actually is from a very technical background, she's a PhD in physics, but was asking, how do I have to reinvent myself as a computer scientist in order to be relevant in this field? Of course, I hope the answer is no. But you alluded to this in saying that there's such a broad array of different skills and backgrounds that you see organizations needing to have to be successful in deploying and applying these new technologies. So at a high level, what is, from your perspective, that sort of set of key skills and capabilities that an organization should look to have, particularly in its leadership team, in order to do, as the title of this talk says, lead the AI-driven organization? What is that set of skills and capabilities in your view?
Well, it's a great question. Kind of. Sorry, what was the person's name? Sorry, I missed.
Lara Al Khoury.
Laura, kind of. Congratulations on being a physicist. That's great. Just to answer I can see you now. Thank you. No, to answer the question, the first part of the question. No, I don't think any of us necessarily need to become expert computer scientists. That said, as somebody who speaks kind of 4 or 5 languages poorly, but I mean kind of human languages, I kind of speak or write kind of a series of kind of computer languages equally poorly as well. What I would recognize is that there is, I think, great value from touching the technology and understanding some of its personality and some of the aspects of how it functions. So taking a fundamentals kind of program on computer science or kind of programming, Python, C++, Java, whatever, dipping your toe or kind of immersing yourself in that type of environment can be very, very useful. What I find in general, and then Peter, I'll answer your question, I promise. And what I generally find is that there's great value in kind of having expertise in 2 or more areas, because it's almost, it kind of stretches the space in which you can kind of innovate and think, and it gives you a series of prisms and lenses through which you can look at the same problem and see different kind of colors and see different frequencies and see different potentialities and different opportunities. So I think that's very, very important. And then in terms of the qualities and the skills that we need within our organizations, this might seem somewhat glib or kind of very kind of easy to trot out, but I'll kind of explain it shortly as well. I think the key one is to be prepared to kind of transition. I think it's cultural, is in nature, is transition from kind of command and control types of mindsets, but past those kind of decentralized network kind of approaches of collaboration, cooperation, and cultivation that we've seen, to truly embrace exploration and engagement. And that sounds all very nice and kind of very sweet and kind of very, very cozy, but in fact it's quite the opposite, because if we're truly going to explore, it means you're going to leave things behind. You're going to kind of truly almost embrace the scientific method, where you're going to say, I'm going to explore this type of stuff, I'm going to build an intuition, I'm going to then kind of develop a hypothesis, I'm going to experiment, collect data, and based on that data, I am going to kind of evolve and develop and kind of move forward. Okay. And I think it's, when I speak about punctuated equilibria, it's almost like walking through a house at night without the lights on. Yeah. I think you want to take small steps. Yeah. You're not going to go galloping kind of across the landing in case you fall down the stairs or what. I think it's very important to have this sense of forward motion and to understand that some of the things that kind of led you to success in the past are actually going to be inhibitors or impedance in your system moving forward. Okay, and the only way that you can determine that, in my experience, and perhaps I'm biased because of where I work and kind of having kind of, you know, mentors such as Peter and others, is through an application of the scientific method. But I think when the lights are off and we're going through a period of transition, it's a pretty useful method to kind of hold on to. So I think that kind of commitment to explore, to experiment, and to be prepared to evolve forward based on the results that we take, the skill and the capability within our organizations to empower and communicate openly with our employees is very important, to be committed to kind of developing ourselves, but also our teams and our customers and our clients, but not just in a learning type of way, teaching. All of us know things that would be beneficial to others in the organization. What type of system do we have to transfer those kind of things? And it comes back to that Manuel Castell's kind of idea of flows of time and space and what have you, and thinking about the connections we have within our networks. And so the only other thing I would add, Peter, and I know I've rambled on a little bit here, and apologies, Lara, is kind of to try to build in a spirit of reflection. If we're always going in one direction at 100 miles an hour, it's very, very difficult to actually determine the degree to which we need to kind of adjust our trajectory. Sometimes taking a step back is very, very important, and just determining where are we here. A lot of people kind of talk about the destinations they want to kind of arrive at, but unless you know where you're starting from or where you are at any given time, it's very difficult to select the correct routes to get there. So I think being kind to each other, to ourselves, to our teams and everything else, and taking some time, it's not a negative just to stop or slow down for a second and think, hang on a second, where am I actually going and why? And be committed to this continuous kind of development, this continuous kind of exploration. Be prepared to leave things behind that kind of clearly, based on the data, aren't working, and based on our kind of decision making aren't kind of working, and be committed to kind of making the changes that are necessary.
Thank you. You know, it seems like at the moment, I hear loud and clear that idea of there's an opportunity for us all to expose ourselves a little bit to hands-on, trying out some of these tools, really getting a sense in a visceral way of what the technology is. But yeah, we've had a few questions as well that sort of get at the you know, thought that there are also maybe some barriers and some concerns. And you know, one of the questions that I hear a lot is, you know, this seems like a field that is changing so quickly that, you know, it's going to be really, really difficult to keep up. I just about get my head around what what my organization might be able to do with ChatGPT based or a particular kind of AI tool. And while I'm still struggling to understand the implications of that, the new set, you know, the new model is out, or the new set of tools that allow third parties to develop all kinds of applications that build on top of it, and it's just, you know, really difficult to track all of that, and then, you know, have all the more concern about what some of the potential negatives are. You know, people have been asking about still the very significant concerns about biases, you know, about hallucinations, about when you know, how reliable, how much can we rely on advice or decisions or output or analysis that we're getting from these technologies, and therefore it's important to have humans in the loop. So what's your advice to, you know, again, this is, I think our audience is people that are thinking about not only their own careers, but also on behalf of their teams and their organizations. And as you have this course, leading the AI driven organization, what's your advice to people on how to balance the ways of experimenting, as you encouraged us to do, but with, you know, all of the sort of unknowns and uncertainty and perceived risks that there are as well?
Yeah, so there is that duality of kind of exploring and experimenting, and kind of at the same, in parallel, kind of determining from an organizational kind of AI enterprise strategy what we need to do kind of medium to longer term, and what are the implications for kind of our security, for acting responsibly, for our workforce, for our, all of the kind of the various dimensions that actually create our organizations functionally and everything else. What I would say is, particularly firstly with regard to the speed of change and what have you, that can be very disorienting, of course. However, if we become, or as we become, and everybody out there, Peter, is in the same position as you and I with all of this. My point is that as we kind of become more adept and kind of more comfortable with exploring and kind of just digging into these technologies and their capabilities and how they can combine with kind of what we've already got, what we do from a human capability perspective as an organization, as an enterprise, as an industry, what we'll find is some of the, and this kind of, it's kind of interesting, this is, what we'll find is we'll start to recognize some of the patterns of development within the technologies itself. You know, I spent, you're kind of PhD in physics and what have you, so you're very experienced in that domain as well as in the business domain. I spent 15 years, as you know, kind of high capacity optical transmission networks, that type of stuff. And it's true that kind of, we're talking about kind of the turn, you know, 98, 2000, 2003, all that, those types of years. There were great changes in kind of the capabilities and the speeds and the feeds and kind of what was going on. But once you understand the underlying principles of kind of the domain in which you're kind of working or kind of focusing upon, some of the evolutions will make sense and seem very, very understandable and very reasonable. So is it a surprise? So last year kind of, and I'm oversimplifying it, of course, but we might argue that kind of 2023 was kind of large language model kind of year. So LLMs, is it once you start playing around with that for a period of months and kind of seeing what's going on with DALL-E 2 at the time and everything else, no great surprise once you start to recognize the principles and the patterns that kind of sit beneath these kind of technologies, to understand that kind of LLMs can kind of move into images, then into video, and on and on. It's not too, once you understand kind of the principles, the algorithmic principles that sit behind AlphaGo, it's kind of easier to appreciate how that can be evolved into AlphaFold. And so what I'm suggesting is that by spending some time actually touching and working and experimenting with these things, we'll start to get a certain confidence. And again, it goes back to translation, Peter, that once we get to a certain proficiency with a language, then we can start to breathe out a tiny bit. And although we still find ourselves in very challenging kind of contexts and situations, and the problems are kind of immense, you start to kind of build not just a capability, but a confidence to walk towards them. And I think that's the key thing. Once we start to feel comfortable operating, because the reality is that all of our organizations, we have one foot in a physical world, one foot in a digital kind of world or context as well, where we're operating. And once we start to feel comfortable operating in that way, then kind of the patterns start to emerge, and we can say, yeah, I'm starting to feel more comfortable. The concerns kind of dissipate somewhat, although we're always very much on our guard to kind of, as things develop, to make sure that we're thinking about things in the right way. But if we don't pull back the curtain and start playing with things and experimenting, exploring, I think every kind of, on the outside, every change that we see, every development appears to be kind of a transition into something new, when in lots of ways, it's almost a continuum, a kind of a pattern that's extending with AI. And my final point on that would be to say, to go back to where I started a little bit, to say, recognizing the arc of kind of AI into machine learning, into deep learning, reinforcement learning, generative AI on a pathway to artificial general intelligence. What we're going to see, I think, in 2024, 25, 26, is kind of some debate and discussion around what artificial general intelligence actually is, and the ways in which generative AI and these other flavors and these other technologies and techniques of AI are going to combine and contribute with the human in the loop and the human capabilities to take our organizations to a place where we can kind of get closer to the 85th floor of the potentialities of all of this and actually kind of drive greater impact. So I think it's disturbing and kind of disorienting, but once we start to kind of play around and become kind of more comfortable with these technologies, I think patterns will emerge that give us a greater confidence that we can actually move forward effectively in our organizations.
Great, thank you. And Paul, time has been flying by for all of us in this conversation, but I think that last point was perhaps a very good one on which to pause and reflect. And maybe if we just could go over by a couple more minutes. You've given us, I think, a really good sense of what it would be like for someone to be in the leading AI-driven organization course with you that is upcoming. But if you had three quick bullet points you wanted to share just about that course and anything you think people would like to know about it, now would be a great time.
Of course, it's kind of very difficult for me not to say we'd love to have you on the program, because fundamentally we're kind of engaging with all of the points that we've raised here today. We're trying to help everybody build an intuition for how AI can drive impact and value in their organizations. So we kind of look kind of where we are today. We determine and define where we are today with AI, what that means for our businesses. We look at the strategies and the implementation kind of things that we need to do, how we need to build AI teams and cultures, what are the considerations around AI ethics, philosophy, kind of responsibility with AI, present and future proofing our organizations based on the future trajectory of kind of AI, but also providing the opportunity with this program to not just finish after 5 days. There's a process by which we will keep in touch, have virtual events that allow us to kind of continue sharing information. So we're trying to bolster this analytical thinking, strategic thinking, project management skills, ethical judgment, decision making, leadership skills, kind of workforce development, and lots of other things as well. So I think it would be very easy to get carried away with kind of the what ifs of this, but this is a program that focuses on what we are going to do, almost acting like digital presences. What are the things that we can do today to enable the organizations we work for to create the futures that they want for to tomorrow morning? So, you know, there are lots of labs, lots of workshops that are personalized kind of playbooks. It's a very hands-on type of experience. So we really try to kind of calibrate the research-based kind of theory, kind of insights of this with kind of putting it all into action. So people who attend the program, they will actually build their own generative AI chatbots. You know, we have people coming in from Microsoft, from Google DeepMind, etc., to help us understand kind of certain of their models and kind of what that means for my organization, for your organization, for our industries. So we're trying to build capability in the program, but also the confidence then to apply that capability. Okay. So we'd you know, it'd be great, wouldn't it, to see you on the program. And if anybody wants some further information, I'll be happy to bore you to death about this, of course.
Great. Thank you again, Paul. This has been fascinating. And I'm seeing in the comments, people have got a lot of value out of this past hour. So imagine what they could get from spending a week with you in this new course. Thank you all for joining us from all around the world, for all of your questions. I'm sorry we only got to a few of them. But again, if you would like to continue the dialogue, there are all the usual ways of doing so. But it remains for me now just to once more thank Paul McDonagh-Smith, Senior Lecturer at MIT Sloan School, for this discussion about leading the AI-driven organization. And thanks to the Exec Ed team behind the scenes for making this all possible and making it happen. Thank you and goodbye.